1. The invisible operator. Imagine that you are lying in bed at night. The room is quiet. There may be a faint sound somewhere outside your window, perhaps the distant hum of traffic, the soft movement of air, maybe the occasional creak of the building as it settles into the night. And for a moment, do nothing. Just listen. You don't need to change your breathing. You don't need to move. You don't need to solve anything. Simply notice that you are here. And now, if you can, notice your breathing. You probably weren't paying attention to it a few seconds ago. And yet, you were breathing. One breath followed another, your lungs expanded, air moved inward, then outward. Your body quietly repeated the process without waiting for instructions from your conscious mind. You could take control of your breathing right now. You could hold your breath for a few seconds. You could deliberately breathe faster or slower. But before you decided to pay attention to it, who was breathing? That question sounds almost absurd. Of course you were. But the strange part is that the version of you that you normally think of as yourself, the voice inside your head, the person making plans, remembering conversations, choosing what to watch, deciding what to eat, wasn't sitting there uttering commands for every breath. You didn't wake up this morning and think, all right, time to begin breathing. Your heart didn't wait for permission to beat. Your stomach didn't ask whether it was allowed to digest your breakfast. Your pupils adjusted to changes in light without consulting you. Your body maintained its temperature while you were thinking about completely unrelated things. And while you were reading these sentences, your brain was quietly coordinating an enormous amount of activity beneath the surface. You weren't asked. You weren't consulted. And you probably didn't even notice. This is one of the strangest things about being human. We experience ourselves as conscious beings. We feel as though we are sitting at the center of our own minds, watching the world through our eyes and making decisions about what happens next. But consciousness is only one part of the machinery. Beneath it is something much larger. Something constantly moving, constantly predicting, constantly adjusting, constantly making decisions about what matters, what doesn't, what should be remembered, what should be ignored, and what the body should do next. You could imagine the brain as an enormous building. The lights are on in one small room. That room is consciousness. It contains your thoughts, your memories, your plans, your questions. You can look around that room. You can focus on one thought, then another. You can decide to imagine a beach, remember a childhood friend, or wonder what you're going to have for breakfast tomorrow. But outside that room, the rest of the building is still operating. Machines are humming. Temperature is being regulated. Doors are opening and closing. Information is being sorted. Security systems are scanning for danger. Maintenance workers are moving through hidden corridors. None of them need to come upstairs and ask you what to do. And perhaps that's a better metaphor for the brain than the idea that consciousness is the CEO. Maybe consciousness is simply the part of the building where the lights happen to be on. The rest continues operating in the darkness. Take a moment to let that idea settle. Your brain is doing things right now that you will never consciously experience. And that isn't a malfunction. It's the point. If you had to consciously control every process necessary to remain alive, you wouldn't have time to do anything else. Imagine having to remember to regulate your heartbeat. Imagine consciously adjusting the diameter of your blood vessels every time you stood up. Imagine calculating the exact amount of force required every time you lifted a cup. Imagine manually controlling your balance while walking. You would never get through breakfast. Fortunately, your brain has systems that handle these things automatically. And this automaticity extends far beyond basic survival. Your brain is constantly deciding what deserves your attention. It is predicting what is likely to happen next. It is comparing what you're experiencing with memories of what happened before. It is interpreting facial expressions. It is evaluating sounds. It is detecting patterns. It is preparing your body for possible threats. And sometimes, it is beginning an action before you become consciously aware that you've decided to act. This doesn't mean that you are a passenger trapped inside your own skull. That's too simple. The relationship between conscious thought and unconscious processing is much more interesting than that. Your conscious mind can influence your brain. You can choose to practice a skill. You can change your environment. You can pause before reacting. You can deliberately form new habits. You can question your assumptions. But the important point is that conscious awareness does not begin the story. By the time you become aware of many things, your brain has already been working on them. Consider something as ordinary as walking into a room. You don't consciously tell yourself to identify the walls. You don't calculate the distance between objects. You don't consciously decide which sounds are background noise. You don't manually construct the three-dimensional space around you. Yet within moments, you have a feeling of knowing where you are. The world simply appears. Solid, coherent, meaningful. It feels effortless. But behind that effortless experience is an extraordinary amount of hidden processing. And this leads to a question that becomes increasingly difficult the longer you think about it. How much of what you experience as reality has already been processed before it reaches your awareness? How much of your attention is chosen for you? How many of your reactions begin before you understand them? How many of your decisions are influenced by processes you never consciously notice? And perhaps most strangely, how much of what you call yourself is being continuously constructed by a brain you can never completely observe from the outside? There is something almost peaceful about this when you stop fighting it. Because you don't have to control everything. You don't have to consciously manage every breath. You don't have to supervise every heartbeat. You don't have to monitor every tiny adjustment your body makes to keep you balanced and alive. Your brain is already doing much of the work. Quietly, constantly, without applause, without asking for permission. And tonight, as we move through these hidden processes, we're going to look at some of the things your brain does before you ever realize they're happening. We'll begin with something deceptively simple. Attention. Because before your brain can help you understand the world, it has to decide which tiny pieces of that world should even reach you. There may be hundreds of sounds around you right now. You may not notice them. There may be sensations touching your skin that you aren't consciously aware of. There may be things within your field of vision that your eyes are receiving, but your mind is ignoring. And somewhere in the middle of all that information, your brain is quietly choosing. Not necessarily asking. Choosing. So before we go any further, take one more slow breath. Notice the air entering your lungs. Notice the feeling of your body resting where it is. And then notice something else. For a moment, listen carefully to the sounds around you. Perhaps you hear one. Then another. Maybe there was a sound you hadn't noticed until you deliberately searched for it. It was there before. Your brain simply wasn't bringing it into the spotlight. And that is where our next mystery begins. Because if your brain is constantly filtering the world before you consciously experience it, Then perhaps you don't see everything that is there. You see what your brain decides is worth seeing. 2. The attention filter. Imagine standing in the middle of a crowded city. There are people walking past you in every direction. Cars are moving through intersections. Someone is talking nearby. A bus is stopping at the curb. A dog is barking somewhere in the distance. Music is coming from a shop. A phone is vibrating in someone's pocket. There are thousands of colors, shapes, sounds, movements, smells, and sensations surrounding you. And yet, you don't experience all of them. You couldn't. Your conscious mind would have no idea where to begin. Instead, somehow, almost effortlessly, you experience only a small portion of everything happening around you. You notice the person standing in front of you. You hear the conversation you're having. You feel the phone in your hand. Perhaps you notice the temperature of the air. Everything else seems to fade into the background. But here's the strange part. The things you aren't consciously noticing haven't necessarily disappeared. Your brain is still receiving information from the environment. It is still processing sounds. It is still detecting movement. It is still monitoring changes around you. Somewhere beneath conscious awareness, your brain is continuously asking a question you never deliberately asked it to ask. What matters right now? And the answer can change in an instant. Imagine you're sitting in a crowded restaurant. There are dozens of conversations happening around you. At first, it's just noise. You aren't consciously listening to any particular table. Then suddenly, someone several seats away says your name. Your attention shifts. You notice it immediately. Perhaps you weren't even aware that your brain was listening for it. But somehow, your name stood out from the ocean of sound. The room didn't become quieter. The other conversations didn't stop. Your brain simply changed the importance assigned to one particular pattern. This is one of the quiet powers of attention. It allows a creature with limited conscious capacity to move through an impossibly complicated world. Think of consciousness as a small flashlight in a dark forest. The forest itself is enormous. There are trees everywhere. Branches move in the wind. Animals make sounds. Leaves rustle. Insects move through the grass. The flashlight cannot illuminate everything at once. So it points somewhere. And wherever it points becomes vivid. Everything outside the beam becomes less important. But here's where the analogy becomes interesting. You may feel as though you are holding the flashlight. But sometimes something in the forest grabs it and turns it for you. A sudden noise. A bright light. A familiar face. A movement in your peripheral vision. Something emotionally important. Something unexpected. Your attention can be captured before you consciously decide to give it away. Think about the last time you heard something suddenly fall in another room. You didn't calmly evaluate the sound and then decide whether you should pay attention. Your attention probably moved automatically. For a brief moment, your mind became alert. Your body may have become slightly tense. You may have tried to determine where the sound came from. Only afterward did you think about whether it was important. This happens because the brain has to make decisions about attention quickly. Waiting for conscious analysis would often be too slow. Imagine our distant ancestors moving through a forest. A sudden rustle in the bushes could mean nothing. It could be the wind. It could be a small animal. Or it could be something dangerous. The brain didn't have the luxury of saying, let's schedule a meeting and carefully discuss this. It needed to respond. So attention became closely connected with survival. Unexpected movement mattered. Potential threats mattered. Anything unusual deserved a closer look. And this ancient system still operates inside us. Of course, modern life has changed dramatically. There are fewer predators hiding behind trees. But our brains still respond strongly to novelty, movement, emotional significance, and potential danger. That's part of why a notification can interrupt your thoughts so easily. Why a flashing screen can pull your eyes toward it. Why a sudden sound makes you look up. Why you might notice your phone vibrating even when you're not expecting a message. Your attention is valuable, and countless things compete for it. But attention isn't only about what enters your mind. It is also about what gets left outside. This is where things become even more mysterious. Because there may be things you are looking directly at without consciously seeing. You can experience this through a simple illusion. Imagine you're talking to someone while walking through a busy place. Your eyes are open. You are surrounded by movement. But if someone later asks you what culk shirt a stranger was wearing several meters away, you may have no idea. The light from that shirt entered your eyes. Your visual system processed it to some degree. But the information may never have become part of your conscious experience. You were paying attention to something else. The brain had decided that the shirt wasn't important. This is sometimes called inattentional blindness, and it reveals something profound about perception. Seeing isn't simply a matter of opening your eyes. Your eyes collect information. Your brain decides what information becomes meaningful enough to reach awareness. This is why you can read a page while someone is speaking nearby without remembering the conversation. It's why you can become so absorbed in a movie that you forget the room around you. It's why, when you're deeply focused on a task, an hour can seem to disappear. Your conscious experience is selective. It has to be. There is simply too much information for everything to receive equal attention. And perhaps this is one of the reasons reality feels so stable. Imagine if every sound, every sensation, every visual detail, every temperature change, and every movement around you entered consciousness with equal importance. You would be overwhelmed. The world would become an avalanche. Instead, the brain compresses it. It filters. It prioritizes. It says, in effect, this matters. That can wait. Look here. Ignore that. And much of this happens without you consciously giving the order. Take a moment to reflect on that. Right now, wherever you are, there are probably countless things happening outside your awareness. Perhaps a distant vehicle is passing. Perhaps someone is walking somewhere nearby. Perhaps your clothing is touching your skin in several places. Perhaps there is a faint electrical hum in the room. Perhaps you can feel the position of your body against whatever is supporting you. All of these signals are potentially available. But your conscious mind doesn't need to carry all of them. Your brain quietly chooses. And sometimes, that choice is influenced by something you didn't realize mattered. If you're hungry, you may notice food more quickly. If you're worried about something, you may notice information related to that worry. If you're waiting for an important message, your attention may become unusually sensitive to your phone. If you're in love, a familiar name can suddenly seem to appear everywhere. The world hasn't necessarily changed. Your attentional filter has. This is where attention becomes more than a simple spotlight. It becomes a kind of editor. And every editor makes choices. The brain selects certain details and leaves others in the background. It decides what becomes vivid, what becomes faint, what becomes important, and what effectively disappears. Which raises a strange question. If your brain is deciding what reaches your conscious awareness, then how much of the world are you actually experiencing? Perhaps consciousness isn't a complete picture of reality. Perhaps it's a carefully edited version, a manageable version, a version your brain believes you can use. And the most surprising part is that the editing doesn't stop there. Your brain doesn't simply filter what is happening around you. It begins making predictions about what will happen next. It looks at the information coming in and quietly asks, "What should I expect?" And those expectations can influence what you experience before the next moment has even arrived. So the next time you look around a room, remember this. You aren't simply seeing everything that is there. You are seeing what your brain has decided to bring forward. The rest is still happening, quietly, just outside the beam of awareness. And if your brain is already filtering reality before you consciously experience it, then perhaps the world you perceive isn't simply the world that arrives. Perhaps it is partly the world your brain expected to find. And that leads us to an even stranger idea. Because your brain may not be waiting for the future to happen. It may already be guessing what comes next. 3. The brain that is always guessing. Imagine you're walking through your home in the middle of the night. The lights are off. You know the rooms well. You know where the furniture is. You know where the walls are. You know the familiar path from your bed to the kitchen. And even though you can't see everything clearly, you don't move like someone wandering through an unknown building. You take a step, then another. You already have an idea of what should be there. You expect the floor to be where it was yesterday. You expect the doorway to be where it has always been. You expect the chair not to suddenly appear in the middle of the hallway. And because your brain has expectations about the world, you can move through it without consciously calculating every detail. This seems ordinary, almost too ordinary to notice. But hidden inside this simple experience is one of the most fascinating ideas in modern neuroscience. Your brain may not simply be receiving information from the world. It may be constantly predicting what the world is going to be like. Before you consciously recognize a familiar room, your brain already has a model of it. Before you finish hearing a familiar sentence, your brain may already have some idea of what word is likely to come next. Before your foot touches the ground, your brain has already prepared for the sensation. And before you consciously understand what you're looking at, your brain has begun interpreting it. In other words, perception may be less like watching a movie that reality is broadcasting into your mind, and more like participating in a conversation. The world sends signals. Your brain makes predictions. The signals confirm some predictions and contradict others. And then your brain adjusts, moment after moment, silently, automatically, without asking you. Consider something as simple as opening a door. You reach for the handle. You don't consciously think about its exact location. You don't calculate the angle of your wrist. You don't estimate how much force your fingers will need. You simply reach, and somehow your hand arrives at almost exactly the right place. Your brain predicted where the handle would be. It predicted how the movement should feel. It predicted the resistance of the door. It predicted what would happen when your fingers closed around the handle. If the door is heavier than expected, you notice. If the handle is somewhere different, you notice. If the door doesn't move when you expect it to, something feels wrong. That feeling of wrongness is important. It means your brain had an expectation, and reality violated it. This happens constantly. We simply don't notice most of the predictions because they are correct. When your brain predicts something accurately, everything feels normal. You reach for the cup and find the cup. You step down and find the floor. You turn your head and recognize the room. Nothing seems mysterious. But when something unexpected happens, the prediction becomes visible. Imagine reaching for your bedroom light switch in the dark and finding nothing where the switch should be. For a fraction of a second, confusion appears. Your hand searches. Your brain updates its model. Maybe you're in a different room. Maybe the furniture has been moved. Maybe you're simply standing a little farther to the side than you thought. The brain is constantly correcting itself. This predictive ability is incredibly useful. Without it, every moment would require enormous amounts of conscious effort. You would have to consciously interpret every sound, every movement, every object, every physical sensation. Instead, your brain uses previous experience to make educated guesses. And those guesses can influence perception itself. Think about how difficult it can be to understand someone when they speak in a noisy environment. You may not hear every sound clearly, yet somehow you understand the sentence. Your brain fills in some of what is missing. It uses context. It uses the words that came before. It uses your knowledge of language. It predicts what kinds of words are likely to appear next. You unconsciously filling in every missing sound. Your brain is doing it for you. This is one reason context is so powerful. If you hear someone say, "The sky is," your brain immediately begins expecting certain possibilities. Blue, dark, cloudy. You don't consciously list every word in the dictionary. Your brain narrows the possibilities automatically. It has learned patterns, and those patterns help it interpret incomplete information. This can be useful, but it can also lead us astray, because a prediction is not the same thing as reality. Sometimes the brain expects something so strongly that it influences what we perceive. This is one reason optical illusions can be so fascinating. The eyes may receive one set of signals, while the brain interprets them through assumptions about depth, lighting, shape, and context. The result can be a perception that feels completely real even though it doesn't accurately describe the physical situation. And that leads to a strange realization. We often imagine that our senses provide us with reality, and then our brains interpret what they receive. But perhaps the process is more complicated. Perhaps the brain is constantly making its best guess about reality, using sensory information to correct that guess. The distinction may seem subtle, but philosophically, it changes everything. Because if perception is partly prediction, then the world you experience is not simply a raw copy of what exists outside you. It is an interpretation, a model, a continually updated hypothesis. Your brain is essentially saying, "This is probably what is happening." Then it checks, and checks again, and checks again. Most of the time, the prediction is good enough that you never notice the process. But occasionally, the prediction fails. And that failure can teach the brain something. Imagine learning to ride a bicycle. At first, your brain has no accurate model for balancing. You wobble. You lean too far. You overcorrect. You fall. You try again. Each attempt provides new information. Gradually, your brain learns to predict how your body will respond. Eventually, you don't consciously think about balance anymore. You simply ride. The prediction has become automatic. The same basic principle operates throughout daily life. The brain learns from repeated experience. It develops expectations. Then it uses those expectations to make the next moment easier to understand. This is one reason familiar environments can feel almost effortless. You don't have to rediscover your bedroom every morning. You don't have to relearn what your friend's voice sounds like each time they speak. You don't have to consciously calculate how gravity works when you place a cup on a table. Your brain has already built models, and those models are running quietly in the background. Take a moment to reflect on this. Right now, as you listen to these words, your brain is predicting what the next word might be. It is using language patterns. It is interpreting the meaning of previous sentences. It is anticipating where the thought might be going. And when the next word arrives, your brain compares it with what it expected. Most of the time, you never notice. But perhaps the deepest mystery is that your brain is not only predicting the outside world. It is also predicting you. It predicts what you will probably do, how your body will move, how something will feel, how another person might respond, how a familiar situation is likely to unfold. And sometimes, those predictions become so deeply embedded that you experience them as certainty. This can be comforting. It can also be dangerous, because expectations can shape perception. If you expect someone to be angry, a neutral expression may look hostile. If you expect something to hurt, your body may become more sensitive to it. If you expect to fail, ordinary difficulties may appear more threatening. The brain isn't trying to deceive you. It is trying to be efficient. It is trying to understand the world quickly using everything it has learned before. But efficiency comes with a price. Your brain can sometimes mistake a prediction for reality. And when that happens, the line between what is actually happening and what you expected to happen becomes surprisingly thin. Perhaps this is why the familiar can feel so powerful. We don't simply recognize familiar things. We anticipate them. We live inside expectations. And those expectations are built from something even more mysterious. The past. Every prediction your brain makes has been shaped, in some way, by what has happened before. Which means that the future is constantly being interpreted through the traces of your history. And nowhere is that more obvious than in memory. Because your brain doesn't simply store the past and retrieve it later like a file on a computer. It does something much stranger. It reconstructs it. Every time you remember something, your brain may be quietly rebuilding the past. And sometimes, without asking you, changing it. For the memory that rewrites itself. Think of a memory from your childhood. Don't choose anything too complicated. Perhaps a birthday, a school classroom, a family trip, a particular house. Maybe a moment when you were standing beside someone you loved. Close your eyes for a moment if you're comfortable doing so. And picture it. Perhaps you can see the room. Maybe you can remember the carcass, the arrangement of furniture, someone's face, a sound in the background, maybe even the feeling of being there. It can seem surprisingly vivid, almost as though some hidden camera inside your mind recorded the moment and stored it somewhere safe. Years later, you simply press play. And there it is. The past. But memory doesn't quite work that way. There is no tiny camera inside your brain filming your life. And there isn't necessarily a perfect recording waiting somewhere inside your head. Instead, remembering is an active process. Your brain takes fragments of information and reconstructs an experience. And every time you remember something, you may be doing more than looking backward. You may be rebuilding the past. This is one of the strangest things the brain does without asking you. Imagine opening an old photograph. You can look at it and see exactly what was captured. The photograph doesn't change because you looked at it. But memory is different. A memory can become active when you recall it. And once it becomes active, it can become more flexible. It may then be stored again. This general process is known as memory reconsolidation. The details are complicated, and scientists are still studying exactly how memory changes over time. But the central idea is surprisingly simple. A memory isn't necessarily a frozen object. It can be updated. It can be influenced by what you know now, by what you believe, by what you've experienced since the original event, by the emotions you're feeling when you remember it, and sometimes by things that never happened at all. This doesn't mean that all of your memories are false. Far from it. Memory is remarkably useful. Without it, you couldn't recognize familiar people, navigate familiar places, learn from mistakes, or develop a sense of personal history. Memory allows your life to feel continuous. Yesterday connects to today. Today connects to tomorrow. You can remember being a child and understand that the child you remember somehow became the person listening to these words. But memory is not perfect continuity. It's reconstruction. Think of an old story that has been told many times within a family. The first person tells it. Then another person tells it. Years pass. Details become emphasized. Certain moments become funny. Others become less important. Eventually, everyone knows the story. But the version being told today may not be identical to what happened originally. Memory can behave in a similar way. The more emotionally important a moment becomes, the more often you may revisit it. And each time you revisit it, you're not necessarily retrieving a perfect original. You're reconstructing it. This helps explain why two people can remember the same event differently. They may have been standing in different places. They may have noticed different details. They may have felt different emotions. They may have interpreted the event differently. And afterward, their memories continue to evolve separately. Years later, both people can be completely sincere. Both can feel certain. And yet their memories may contradict each other. Neither person has to be lying. Neither person has to be deliberately inventing anything. Their brains are simply reconstructing the event from different pieces. This is one reason memory can be so convincing. It doesn't usually feel like imagination. It feels like remembering. And there is a profound difference between those experiences. When you imagine a place you've never visited, you often know you're imagining. But when you remember your childhood home, you may experience the image as something that truly happened. Your brain gives the memory a sense of familiarity, a sense of personal reality. And that feeling can be incredibly powerful. But feeling certain isn't the same thing as being perfectly accurate. Consider how memory works with small details. You may remember where you were sitting. You may remember what someone was wearing. You may remember the weather. You may even remember the exact words someone said. But some of those details may have been reconstructed from other information. Perhaps you've seen photographs from the event. Perhaps you've heard someone else tell the story. Perhaps you've remembered the same moment so many times that the details feel more solid than they actually are. Over time, pieces can blend. A photograph can become part of a memory. Someone else's description can become part of your own recollection. An assumption can become a detail. And eventually, you may no longer be able to tell where the original memory ends and the later reconstruction begins. This is not a defect unique to you. It is part of how human memory works. Your brain is not trying to preserve every detail of your past like a museum curator. It's trying to maintain a useful model. It wants to remember what matters, what happened, what it meant, what you should learn from it, what might happen again. In that sense, memory and prediction are closely connected. Your brain uses the past to anticipate the future. If something hurt you before, remembering it can help you avoid similar situations. If something made you feel safe, your memory can guide you toward it again. The past becomes a map. But maps don't have to preserve every detail of the landscape. They only need to help you navigate. And perhaps that explains why memory can sometimes feel less like an archive and more like a story. A story that your brain keeps editing because it needs the story to remain useful. Take a moment to think about someone you know well. Picture their face. You probably don't experience every individual feature separately. You experience a whole person, a familiar pattern, a collection of memories, emotions, expectations, and associations. Your brain has compressed years of information into something you can access almost instantly. That is an extraordinary achievement. But compression always means losing some detail. And sometimes the missing details are replaced by assumptions. This becomes especially interesting when emotions are involved. A painful memory may become darker with time. A happy memory may become softer. A difficult childhood moment may be understood differently when you're an adult. The event itself hasn't changed, but your interpretation of it can. And because memory is connected to meaning, changing the meaning can sometimes change the memory itself. Think about that for a moment. You can remember something from 10 years ago and understand it completely differently today. Perhaps something that once embarrassed you now makes you laugh. Perhaps something you once blamed yourself for now seems clearly outside your control. Perhaps someone you once admired now seems very different. The past remains fixed, but your relationship with the past is not fixed. Your brain can revisit old experiences using new information. And this is where memory becomes almost philosophical. What does it mean to say that you are the same person you were 10 years ago? Part of the answer is that you remember being that person. Your memories connect your present self with your earlier selves. They create a thread, a sense of continuity. But if those memories are constantly being reconstructed, then perhaps the thread isn't a perfect line. Perhaps it is more like a story that is continuously being rewritten. You wake up each morning carrying an edited version of your past. Not necessarily an inaccurate one. Not necessarily a fictional one. But a living one. A version that has been shaped by everything that happened afterward. And this can be strangely comforting. Because you are not permanently trapped inside the first interpretation you gave your experiences. The brain can update. It can reinterpret. It can learn. It can change the emotional meaning attached to an old memory. The past itself cannot be rewritten, but your brain's relationship with it can change. And perhaps that's one of the quiet gifts hidden inside this strange machinery. Your mind doesn't simply preserve your history. It keeps revisiting it, trying to understand it, trying to use it, trying to turn it into something that might help you navigate whatever comes next. But there is another reason the brain remembers. Sometimes memory isn't just about learning. Sometimes it is about protection. A sound, a smell, a place, a facial expression, a particular situation. Something from the past can suddenly make your body react before you consciously understand why. Your heart may beat faster. Your muscles may tighten. Your attention may sharpen. The feeling arrives first. The explanation comes later. And this brings us to another hidden process running quietly beneath consciousness. The brain's ancient alarm system. The part of you that can sense danger before the thinking part of you has finished asking what happened. Because sometimes the brain doesn't wait for the conscious mind to understand the threat. It prepares the body first, and only afterwards does it tell you the story. 5. The alarm before the thought. Imagine you're walking home late at night. The street is quiet. Most of the windows are dark. There are only a few sounds around you. Your footsteps, a distant vehicle, the soft movement of wind through the trees. You aren't necessarily afraid. You're simply walking. Then suddenly, you hear something behind you. A sharp sound, a movement, perhaps the scrape of something against the pavement. And before you've even figured out what made the sound, something changes. Your body reacts. Your attention snaps toward it. Your muscles become slightly tense. Your breathing changes. Your heart may begin beating faster. For a brief moment, the world feels different. You turn around, and there is nothing there. Maybe it was a branch. Maybe a loose piece of metal. Maybe someone closing a gate. The danger was never real. And yet your body didn't wait to find out. It reacted first. The explanation came later. This is one of the oldest tricks your brain knows. When something might be dangerous, it is often safer to prepare first and investigate afterward. You could think of it as an ancient alarm system. It isn't particularly interested in giving you a detailed philosophical explanation of what is happening. Its first question is much simpler. Could this be dangerous? If the answer might be yes, the brain can begin preparing the body before conscious thought has fully caught up. This is why a sudden noise can make you jump. Why you might pull your hand away from something hot before consciously thinking about the pain. Why you can freeze for a moment when something moves unexpectedly in your peripheral vision. The body is capable of responding extremely quickly. And that speed has deep evolutionary roots. Imagine a human being thousands of years ago walking through a forest. A branch cracks nearby. There are two possibilities. It is nothing, or something dangerous is approaching. If the brain always waited for certainty, it could be too late. So the nervous system developed ways of responding to uncertainty. A sudden movement becomes important. An unfamiliar sound becomes important. A rapidly approaching object becomes important. A face that looks threatening becomes important. The system doesn't need to know exactly what something is. It only needs to decide whether further attention is necessary. This is why the brain can sometimes react to danger before you can explain what you're feeling. And the fascinating part is that the alarm doesn't only respond to things happening right now. It can also respond to memories. Remember the previous segment. Your brain uses the past to predict the future. That means a previous experience can teach your nervous system what to watch for. A particular sound, a certain place, a particular expression, a smell, a situation. Something that once accompanied danger can later become a warning signal. And sometimes the connection is so subtle that you don't consciously recognize it. You might walk into a room and suddenly feel uncomfortable. You might meet someone and immediately feel that something isn't right. You might hear a particular song and notice a strange change in your mood. The conscious mind may search for an explanation, but the body may have already responded. This doesn't mean that every instinctive feeling is correct. That's important. Your alarm system is designed to protect you, not to produce perfect philosophical certainty. And a system designed to avoid danger can sometimes become overly cautious. Think about a smoke alarm. Its job is to detect the possibility of fire. But a smoke alarm doesn't understand whether dinner is burning or the entire house is on fire. It simply detects a pattern that might indicate danger. Sometimes it screams because something is genuinely wrong. Sometimes it screams because you made toast. The nervous system can behave in a similar way. A racing heart doesn't always mean you're in danger. It might mean you're excited. It might mean you've had too much caffeine. It might mean you've just climbed stairs. It might mean you're nervous about an upcoming conversation. The physical sensation is real, but the interpretation can vary. This is where the relationship between the body and the mind becomes especially interesting. We often imagine emotions as thoughts that happen in the brain. We think, I am scared, therefore my heart is beating faster. But sometimes the sequence can feel almost reversed. Your heart begins beating faster. Your breathing changes. Your muscles tense. Your attention becomes sharper. And then your conscious mind tries to understand what all of those signals mean. Perhaps the thought becomes, something is wrong. This is part of why anxiety can feel so mysterious. The body can begin preparing for danger even when the conscious mind can't identify a specific threat. The alarm goes off. Then the mind starts searching for the fire. And sometimes, because the body already feels threatened, the mind finds something to explain it. A thought, a possibility, a memory, a future scenario. Something. The brain wants the feeling to make sense. Take a moment to reflect on that. Have you ever felt uneasy before knowing why? Have you ever walked into a situation and immediately felt tension in your body? Have you ever looked back later and realized that the thing you feared wasn't actually dangerous? That doesn't necessarily mean your reaction was irrational. Your brain was making a prediction based on incomplete information. It was essentially saying, I'm not sure what this is, but I would rather be prepared. And from an evolutionary perspective, that can be a very useful bias. Missing a harmless event is usually inexpensive. Missing a real threat can be catastrophic. So the system is often biased toward caution. It would rather occasionally mistake a shadow for danger than consistently mistake danger for a shadow. This is one of the hidden costs of being alive. Your brain has learned that uncertainty itself can deserve attention. And that means your body can sometimes move faster than your reasoning. The strange thing is that we usually experience the opposite. We imagine that thought comes first. We see something. We understand it. Then we react. But the nervous system often works on multiple timelines at once. Some responses happen almost instantly. Other processes take longer. and conscious interpretation may arrive after both. You hear the sound. Your body reacts. Your attention shifts. Then you think, what was that? The thought isn't necessarily the beginning of the reaction. Sometimes it's the explanation that arrives afterward. And that raises an uncomfortable question. How many times in ordinary life do we believe our conscious explanations are the cause of our reactions when they might actually be explanations for reactions that have already begun? Maybe someone says something in a certain tone. You immediately feel defensive. Only afterward do you think of a reason why their comment was offensive. Maybe someone doesn't reply to your message. You feel uneasy. Then your mind begins generating explanations. Maybe they're upset. Maybe you did something wrong. Maybe something happened. The body experiences uncertainty. The mind fills in the story. This doesn't mean our thoughts are meaningless. Quite the opposite. Conscious reasoning can interrupt automatic reactions. You can notice your heart racing and remind yourself that you're safe. You can feel anger rising and choose not to act on it. You can recognize fear and investigate whether the threat is real. In that sense, consciousness may not always be the first voice in the conversation, but it can still become an important voice. The alarm may ring. You don't necessarily have to obey it. And perhaps that is the most useful thing to understand about this hidden system. Your automatic reactions are not always commands. Sometimes they are signals. Your brain is saying, pay attention, not necessarily. Run, not necessarily. Fight, not necessarily. This is definitely dangerous. Just, something has changed. And once you understand that distinction, the mysterious feeling of an instinct becomes a little less mysterious. It becomes information, an ancient system quietly scanning the environment, protecting you, predicting danger, preparing your body, often before the conscious mind has finished understanding what is happening. But the brain has another way of saving energy. It doesn't want to consciously analyze every repeated action either. Once something becomes familiar enough, the brain can begin turning it into a routine. You stop thinking about every step. You simply do it. And eventually, you may find yourself doing something before you even realize you decided to. You pick up your phone, open an app, check something, scroll, and suddenly wonder, why am I doing this? The alarm system isn't the only thing operating without asking. There is another quiet system constantly looking for ways to make behavior easier. It is the machinery of habit. And once a behavior becomes familiar enough, your brain may stop asking for permission at all. 6. The habit machine. Imagine waking up in the morning. You are still half asleep. The room is quiet, and your thoughts haven't completely arrived yet. You reach for your phone. Maybe you don't even remember deciding to do it. Your hand simply moves toward the familiar place where the phone usually rests. You unlock it. You look at the screen. You open an app. You scroll for a few moments. And then, perhaps, you suddenly notice what you're doing. You weren't trying to accomplish anything. You weren't looking for a particular piece of information. There was no carefully considered decision. You simply did it, almost automatically. And if you've ever had that experience, you're not unusual. Your brain is designed to make repeated actions easier. In fact, one of the most remarkable things about the human brain is how quickly something that once required conscious effort can become almost effortless. Think about the first time you learned to ride a bicycle. At the beginning, every movement required attention. Where should your hands go? How hard should you turn the handlebars? What happens if you lean too far? How do you keep your balance? You probably had to think about all of it. But after enough practice, something changed. You stopped thinking about every movement. Your body simply knew. You could ride while thinking about something else. You could have a conversation. You could look around. The behavior had become automatic. Your brain had taken something complicated and compressed it into a smoother sequence. This is one of the great advantages of habits. They save energy. Your conscious attention is limited. You can't spend all day carefully deciding how to tie your shoes, brush your teeth, walk across a room, or hold a cup. So the brain learns repeated patterns. Once a behavior becomes familiar, the conscious mind doesn't need to supervise every tiny step. This is useful. It's one of the reasons humans can become incredibly skilled at things. A musician can play a familiar melody without consciously thinking about every finger. A driver can operate a familiar route while thinking about something else. A person who has cooked the same meal many times can move around the kitchen almost automatically. Practice changes the relationship between effort and action. Something that once demanded attention becomes something you simply do. But there is a stranger side to this ability. Sometimes the habit continues even after the original reason for it has disappeared. Imagine a path through a forest. The first person walks through it because they need to reach the other side. Then another person follows. Then another. Eventually, the grass becomes flattened. The route becomes obvious. People start taking the same path because the path already exists. Habits can develop in a similar way. A behavior happens repeatedly. The brain learns the sequence. And eventually, a familiar cue can trigger the behavior almost automatically. This is often described using a simple pattern. A cue appears. A behavior follows. Then something rewarding happens. The reward doesn't necessarily have to be dramatic. It could be relief, entertainment, comfort, novelty, connection, a sense of completion. Even the temporary disappearance of boredom can be rewarding. Over time, the brain learns the relationship. A certain situation becomes associated with a certain response. Feeling bored. Reach for the phone. Finish eating. Look for something sweet. Sit down to work. Check notifications first. Get into bed. Open another video. The behavior can become so familiar that the cue and the response almost seem connected by invisible string. And because this process happens gradually, you may not notice when the behavior stops feeling like a choice. That's the strange part. You can still experience the action as something you chose. But sometimes the decision was barely conscious. A familiar cue appeared. The brain recognized the pattern. The behavior began. And only afterward did awareness catch up. Take a moment to think about how often your hands know what to do before your mind does. You've probably typed the same password so many times that your fingers remember the sequence. You've probably walked through a familiar room without consciously thinking about each step. You've probably opened your phone without remembering what you originally intended to check. These moments reveal something important about the brain. Automatic does not mean meaningless. It means practiced. It means efficient. It means the brain has learned that conscious supervision is no longer necessary. This is one of the reasons habits can be so powerful. They allow us to perform complex behaviors while freeing our attention for other things. But the same mechanism that makes useful habits possible can also make unwanted habits difficult to change. Because once a behavior becomes automatic, simply deciding not to do it may not be enough. The cue can still appear. The old pattern can still activate. The body can still begin moving before conscious thought catches up. This is why someone might unlock their phone without intending to. Why they might open the same application automatically. Why they might find themselves repeating a familiar routine even while thinking, I don't actually want to do this. The brain isn't necessarily ignoring you. It is following a pattern it has learned. And learned patterns can be surprisingly persistent. But they can also change. The same brain that builds habits can build new ones. A repeated behavior can eventually become automatic too. This means that automaticity isn't the enemy. It's a tool. The important question is what you teach the tool to repeat. Think about brushing your teeth. You probably don't have to negotiate with yourself every morning. You don't wake up and think, should I brush my teeth today? Let's examine the evidence. The routine is already established. And that's convenient. Imagine if every basic behavior required a conscious debate. Life would become exhausting. Habits protect us from that exhaustion. They create shortcuts through ordinary life. But shortcuts can take you somewhere useful. Or somewhere you didn't intend to go. And there is another fascinating detail. Habits don't only influence behavior. They can influence how we experience time. When you're doing something familiar, your conscious mind may record fewer distinct details. A repetitive day can feel as though it disappeared. A novel experience, on the other hand, can feel rich and expansive because the brain is processing more unfamiliar information. This may be one reason childhood summers can seem enormous in memory, while repetitive adult weeks can seem to vanish almost instantly. The clock may move at the same speed, but your experience of it can change depending on how much your brain is doing that is new. So when life becomes highly repetitive, the brain can enter a kind of efficiency mode. It doesn't need to constantly announce, "You are doing this again." It simply runs the routine. And perhaps that's why sometimes we suddenly wake up inside our own behavior. We're halfway through scrolling. Halfway through a familiar route. Halfway through a sentence we've said many times. And for one brief moment, we become aware. Oh, I'm doing this again. That moment of awareness is important. Because noticing an automatic pattern creates a small space between the impulse and the action. And inside that space, choice becomes possible. You may not control every impulse that appears, but you can sometimes notice it. You can pause. You can decide whether to continue. The habit may knock on the door automatically. You don't have to open it. Take a quiet moment to reflect on that. Your brain spends much of its time trying to make life easier. It learns what you repeat. It automates what you practice. It turns effort into familiarity. And sometimes, without realizing it, you become the person who follows the path simply because the path is already there. But the brain is not only learning what actions to repeat. It is also keeping track of something much larger. Time. Not the time shown by a clock on the wall. Something deeper. A biological rhythm that quietly influences when you feel awake, when you feel tired, when you feel hungry, and when the world begins to feel softer around the edges. You don't have to consciously tell yourself when to become sleepy. You don't have to schedule the moment your body begins preparing for morning. Somewhere deep inside, another system is keeping watch. A clock you cannot see. And even while you sleep, it continues ticking. 7. The clock you can't see. Imagine that you wake up just a few minutes before your alarm. The room is still dark. You haven't heard the alarm yet. You haven't checked the time. And yet somehow you open your eyes. You lie there for a moment, still caught somewhere between sleep and waking. Then you reach for your phone. 6:58. Your alarm was set for 7:00. 2 minutes remain. It can feel strangely precise. Almost as if some hidden part of you knew what time it was. But perhaps, in a sense, it did. Inside your brain and body is a system that keeps track of time. Not in the way a clock on the wall does. There are no tiny hands turning around a numbered face. Instead, there is a network of biological rhythms quietly coordinating when you become sleepy, when you become alert, when your body expects food, and when certain physiological processes should become more or less active. You don't have to consciously operate it. You don't have to wind it. You don't have to remember to check it. It simply continues, even while you're asleep. This is your circadian rhythm. And it is one of the quietest forms of control your brain has over your everyday life. Think about how different the world feels at different times of day. Morning light enters a room. The body begins to wake. Your thoughts become clearer. Your muscles become more active. Your attention gradually expands. Then evening arrives. The light outside becomes softer. Your environment becomes quieter. Your body begins shifting toward rest. Your eyelids become heavier. The same room that felt ordinary at noon can feel completely different at midnight. Nothing about the physical room may have changed, but your internal state has. Your brain has been keeping time. And one of the most important signals it uses is light. Light entering your eyes provides information about the outside world. It helps your biological system understand whether it is day or night. In a very basic sense, light tells your brain, this is the part of the day when you should probably be awake. And darkness provides a different message. The environment is changing. Night is approaching. Prepare for rest. Of course, modern life has made this system more complicated. We can surround ourselves with artificial light long after the sun has disappeared. We can stare into bright screens late at night. We can work through the night and sleep during the day. We can travel across time zones and suddenly ask the body to believe that noon is midnight. But the biological clock doesn't instantly change its mind just because the calendar says it should. It needs time. This is one reason jet lag can feel so strange. You may know intellectually that it is morning. You may look at the clock. You may understand exactly where you are. But your body may disagree. Your eyes may feel heavy. Your appetite may arrive at the wrong time. Your concentration may feel different. You can know the time consciously while your body is still operating according to an older schedule. That distinction is fascinating. There is the time you know, and there is the time your body feels. They are not always the same. Your biological clock doesn't only influence sleep. It is connected to many processes throughout the body. Hormonal signals change. Body temperature shifts. Alertness rises and falls. Metabolism changes. The tendency to feel sleepy changes. Your brain is not a machine that simply turns on in the morning and off at night. It moves through different states, and those states influence how you experience the world. Think about the difference between being awake at 10 in the morning and being awake at 3 in the morning. At 10 a.m., a problem might feel manageable. At 3 a.m., the same problem can suddenly seem enormous. The words in an old message can feel more painful. A worry about tomorrow can become unusually convincing. A small uncertainty can turn into an entire imagined future. The external facts may not have changed, but your internal state has. This is why the phrase, "I'll think about it tomorrow," sometimes contains more wisdom than it seems. The brain you have at one time of day is not operating under exactly the same conditions as the brain you have at another. Sleep, wakefulness, hormones, body temperature, accumulated sleep pressure, and circadian timing all interact. Your thoughts don't float independently above your biology. They emerge from it. And perhaps this is another way your brain does something without asking you. It changes the lens through which you experience reality. You may believe you're simply reacting to the world, but part of your reaction depends on the state your body happens to be in. Take a moment to notice that. Think about how you feel right now, not what you think about how you feel. Actually notice it. Is your body energetic, heavy, restless, calm, warm, cool, alert, sleepy? You don't have to change anything. Just notice. That state didn't appear from nowhere. Your brain and body have been tracking time, light, activity, food, sleep, and countless other signals. And all of those signals help shape the state you're experiencing right now. There is something almost poetic about this. While you are busy thinking about your life, your body is quietly preparing you for the next part of it. When evening approaches, it begins shifting toward rest. When morning approaches, it begins preparing for activity. You don't have to issue the command. The process is already underway. Even the feeling of sleepiness can arrive gradually. At first, perhaps you feel perfectly awake. Then your concentration begins to soften. Your eyes become heavier. Your thoughts wander. You read the same sentence twice. The world becomes quieter. And eventually, the desire to sleep becomes difficult to ignore. You can resist it for a while, but you can't negotiate with biology forever. Eventually, the body wins. And when sleep finally arrives, something extraordinary happens. Consciousness changes. The constant stream of deliberate thought becomes quieter. The outside world becomes less important. Yet the brain doesn't shut down. It continues working. It cycles through different stages of sleep. It processes information. It regulates the body. It maintains essential functions. It changes patterns of neural activity. And somewhere within this darkness, memories may be reorganized. Dreams may appear. The body may remain almost completely still while the brain continues its work. This is why sleep is such a strange state. From the outside, it can look like nothing is happening. But inside, an enormous amount is happening. You are not consciously supervising any of it. You don't have to. Your brain knows how to enter sleep. It knows how to maintain it. And eventually, under the right conditions, it knows how to begin waking you again. Sometimes it does this so precisely that you open your eyes before the alarm. It can feel almost mysterious. But perhaps the mystery is not that your body knows the time. Perhaps the mystery is that your body has been keeping time all along. Long before you looked at a clock. Long before humans invented schedules. long before there were phones, calendars, or alarms. Life evolved around cycles. Light and darkness, activity and rest, hunger and fullness, warmth and cold. The human brain developed inside those rhythms. Modern life may tell us that every hour should be equally productive, that we can work whenever we want, sleep whenever we want, eat whenever we want, stay awake as long as we want. But underneath all those decisions is an older system, a biological rhythm that continues quietly. It doesn't care about deadlines. It doesn't care about notifications. It doesn't care that you promised yourself you'd stay awake for just one more episode. It keeps moving, slowly, silently, predictably. And perhaps that is why nighttime can feel so different. As the outside world becomes quieter, the internal rhythm becomes easier to notice. Your thoughts slow down. Your body becomes heavier. The boundary between attention and sleep begins to soften. And as you lie there, your brain continues its strange work. But there is another mystery waiting for us. Because even when you are wide awake, your brain is doing something that feels completely effortless. It is taking light, sound, movement, color, and shape, and turning them into a world. You open your eyes and assume you are simply seeing what is there. But seeing may not be that simple. The eyes receive light. The brain interprets it. And somewhere between those two processes, your experience of reality is created. Which means that the next time you look around a room, you might ask yourself a strange question. Are you seeing the world exactly as it is? Or are you seeing the brain's best interpretation of what it believes is there? Because your eyes may be open, but your brain is still doing the seeing. 8. Seeing what isn't there. Imagine opening your eyes in the morning. Before you move, before you reach for your phone, before you think about what the day might bring, there is a moment when the world simply appears. The ceiling is there. The walls are there. The curtains, the window, the light coming through the room. Perhaps a familiar object is sitting on a table nearby. You don't have to think about what you're seeing. You don't have to consciously interpret every shape. You don't have to tell yourself that one surface is closer than another, that a certain object has a particular size, or that the room continues beyond the small area you're currently looking at. You simply see. And because seeing feels so effortless, it is easy to assume that your eyes are essentially cameras. Light enters. A picture is created. The brain looks at the picture. Simple. But that isn't quite what happens. Your eyes don't give you a finished world. They provide your brain with signals. And your brain has to turn those signals into something meaningful. It has to figure out what you're looking at, where it is, how far away it might be, whether it is moving, whether it is important, whether it resembles something you've seen before. In other words, your eyes collect information, but your brain creates the experience of seeing. And sometimes it creates things that aren't actually there. Think about looking at clouds. A few shapes drift across the sky. One looks like an animal. Another looks like a face. Perhaps you see a familiar object in the pattern. You know rationally that there isn't actually a giant face floating above you. It's just water droplets and light. And yet, for a moment, you see something meaningful. This tendency has a name. Pareidolia. It is the tendency to perceive recognizable patterns, especially faces in ambiguous or random information. And faces are particularly powerful. Look at almost any collection of random shapes long enough, and you may eventually find yourself seeing eyes, a mouth, a nose, a face staring back at you. You might see one in the grain of wood, in the front of a car, in the pattern of a building, in a stain on a wall. The pattern doesn't need to actually contain a face. Your brain is exceptionally good at searching for one. Why? Because faces matter. For humans, recognizing another person's face is incredibly important. A face can tell you who someone is, whether they're familiar, whether they're paying attention, whether they seem happy, angry, afraid, or indifferent. The brain has strong reasons to be sensitive to face-like patterns. But this sensitivity has a side effect. Sometimes the brain sees a meaningful pattern where none exists. And that reveals something important. Your brain isn't simply waiting for reality to provide meaning. It is actively searching for meaning. It is constantly trying to turn incomplete information into something understandable. Imagine you're walking through a forest at dusk. You see something between the trees. At first, it looks like a person. You stop. You stare. Your heart may beat a little faster. Then you move closer. It was a tree. Nothing more. But for a moment, your brain interpreted the available information as a human figure. The shadows, branches, and movement combined into a pattern that resembled something familiar. The experience felt real. The interpretation was wrong. And that distinction is important. You weren't deliberately imagining a person. You actually saw one. Or at least, you experienced something very much like seeing one. Your brain made its best guess. Then new information arrived. And the guess changed. This is happening constantly. The brain is trying to make sense of incomplete sensory information. Sometimes the information is clear. Sometimes it isn't. And when there are gaps, the brain fills them. Think about the blind spot in your vision. There is a small region in each eye where the optic nerve leaves the retina. There are no light-sensitive cells there. In other words, there is literally a tiny area where your eye cannot detect visual information. Yet you don't walk around with two obvious holes in your vision. You don't see a blank circle wherever you look. Your brain fills in the missing information. It uses surrounding patterns. It makes an educated guess about what should be there. And because the guess is usually good enough, you never notice the absence. This is a remarkable example of how little of your conscious visual experience is simply raw sensory data. Your brain is constantly completing the picture. Imagine looking at a familiar object with part of it hidden. You can probably still recognize it. A chair behind a table is still a chair. A person's face, partly hidden behind a doorway, is still recognizable as a face. Your brain doesn't need every detail. It uses what it already knows. Context becomes part of perception. Expectation becomes part of perception. Memory becomes part of perception. And this brings us back to the previous segment. Your brain predicts. It uses previous experience to interpret what is arriving now. If you have seen thousands of chairs throughout your life, your brain has a powerful model of what a chair is supposed to look like. You don't have to consciously inspect every object. You recognize the pattern. And recognition is fast, almost instant. This speed is useful. But again, it comes with a price. Sometimes the brain recognizes something too quickly. A person walking toward you from a distance may briefly look like someone you know. For a second, your brain says, "There they are." Then you get closer. No. Not them. The prediction has been corrected. The same thing can happen with sounds. You may hear your name in a noisy room. You may think someone said something familiar. You may hear a word inside a random noise. Your brain is constantly searching for meaningful patterns. And when the information is uncertain, it sometimes chooses the interpretation that seems most likely. This is not necessarily a flaw. It is a survival strategy. Imagine a creature that had to wait for perfect sensory information before reacting. It would be slow, vulnerable. Instead, the brain makes rapid guesses. Sometimes those guesses are wrong, but often they're useful enough. And there is something deeply strange about that, because it means that the world you experience is not simply made of things that enter your senses. It is made of things your brain has interpreted. You don't experience wavelengths of light. You experience culture. You don't experience air pressure vibrations. You experience sound. You don't experience reflected electromagnetic radiation. You experience a face. The raw signals are transformed into meaningful experiences. And the transformation happens so smoothly that you don't notice it. Take a moment to reflect on that. Look at something near you. A cup, a wall, a plant, your hand. Whatever happens to be within reach. It feels completely obvious. You don't question what it is. But your brain is taking light entering your eyes and transforming it into an internal representation. It is identifying edges, shapes, colors, depth, movement, familiarity, meaning. And it is doing all of this before you consciously explain any of it. The experience arrives already assembled, like a finished picture. But underneath that picture is an enormous amount of hidden work. Perhaps this is why visual illusions can feel so unsettling. They expose the machinery. They show you that perception isn't always a direct reflection of reality. You can know something is an illusion and still experience it as real. You can tell yourself, I know those lines are the same length, and yet they may still look different. You can know there isn't a face in the pattern, and still see one. Your conscious reasoning can understand the truth, while your perceptual system continues to produce a different experience. That is a beautiful reminder that the brain isn't a single voice. Different systems can operate simultaneously. One part can know something intellectually. Another can continue perceiving it differently. And this is why the phrase, seeing is believing, can be misleading. Sometimes, seeing is simply the brain's best current guess. A guess so convincing that you forget it is a guess. And the same machinery that constructs the visual world also helps construct something even more personal. Your emotional world. Because just as the brain interprets patterns of light and sound, it also interprets signals coming from inside your body. A racing heart, a tight chest, warmth, tension, fatigue, a fluttering feeling in the stomach. These sensations don't always arrive with labels attached. The brain has to interpret them. It has to decide what they mean. Is this excitement, fear, anticipation, stress, something else? And sometimes, just as with vision, the brain may begin constructing an explanation before you consciously realize that you're having an emotion. So perhaps the next mystery isn't what you see outside yourself. Perhaps it is what you feel inside. Because your brain doesn't simply show you a world. It may also be quietly telling you what that world means. and what your own body is trying to say. 9. The emotion before the explanation. Imagine that you're sitting quietly in a room. Nothing unusual is happening. You aren't in danger. There is no immediate problem that needs solving. And yet suddenly you notice something inside yourself. Your heart seems to be beating a little faster. Your breathing feels different. Perhaps your stomach feels slightly tense. Your shoulders have tightened. You can't immediately explain why. Then a thought appears. Something feels wrong. It's a strange experience. The feeling seems to arrive first. The explanation comes afterward. And this happens more often than we realize. We tend to imagine emotions as simple messages delivered by the brain. Something happens. We interpret it. Then we feel an emotion. Someone says something hurtful, so we become angry. Something frightening happens, so we become afraid. Something wonderful happens, so we become happy. The sequence seems obvious, but the reality may be much more complicated. Your brain is constantly monitoring what is happening inside your body. Your heartbeat, your breathing, your temperature, your energy levels, the sensations in your stomach, the tension in your muscles, and countless other signals that you rarely notice consciously. Your brain is trying to maintain the body's internal balance. This general process is sometimes described through the concept of homeostasis. Your body is constantly adjusting itself to keep internal conditions within workable ranges. You don't have to consciously manage these adjustments. You don't think, "My body temperature has changed by a small amount. I should now activate the appropriate physiological response." You simply exist, and the body quietly works. But the brain isn't only regulating the body. It is also interpreting information from the body. And this is where emotion becomes mysterious. Imagine your heart suddenly begins beating faster. What does that mean? By itself, the sensation doesn't necessarily contain a complete explanation. A faster heartbeat could happen because you're frightened, or because you're excited, or because you've just climbed a staircase, or because you're nervous about meeting someone, or because you've had a strong cup of coffee. The physical signal is real, but the meaning depends partly on context. Your brain has to interpret the signal. It has to make sense of what is happening inside you while also considering what is happening around you. This process is closely related to a concept known as interoception. Interoception is, broadly speaking, the brain's sensing and interpretation of signals from inside the body. You don't consciously feel every internal process, but your brain is constantly receiving information about your physiological state. Sometimes that information becomes part of conscious experience. You notice hunger, thirst, fatigue, a pounding heart, a feeling of warmth, a knot in your stomach. Other times, the information remains outside awareness, and yet it can still influence how you feel and behave. This is one reason emotions can sometimes seem to appear from nowhere. Perhaps you walk into a room and immediately feel uneasy. You don't know why. You haven't consciously identified a threat, but your body may already be responding to subtle information. The tone of someone's voice, their posture, the atmosphere of the room, a memory triggered by the environment, a slight change in your own physical state. Your brain gathers all of it, and then it produces an experience. Something feels strange. The conscious mind receives the final impression. But much of the work happened before the feeling became a thought. Take a moment to reflect on that. Think about the last time you felt nervous. Try to remember the physical sensation. Perhaps your stomach tightened. Maybe your hands became warm. Maybe your heart accelerated. Maybe you felt restless. Now imagine experiencing those same sensations while sitting on a roller coaster. You might call them excitement. Now imagine experiencing them while standing alone in a dark alley. You might call them fear. The body's signals can overlap. The interpretation changes. Context matters. This helps explain why excitement and anxiety can sometimes feel surprisingly similar. Both can involve heightened arousal. The difference may partly depend on how your brain interprets that arousal. This doesn't mean emotions are imaginary. They are not. The physical changes are real. The subjective experience is real. The consequences are real. But the brain may be constructing the emotional meaning from many different sources, rather than simply reading a fixed emotion directly from the body. This is a powerful idea because it changes how we think about feelings. Instead of imagining emotions as simple packages that arrive fully formed, we can think of them as experiences constructed from interacting signals. The brain asks, in effect, what is happening inside me? What is happening around me? What happened before? What usually happens in situations like this? What does this pattern probably mean? And it does much of this automatically. You don't consciously answer each question. The brain does. Quietly, rapidly, continuously. And sometimes the explanation it produces is wrong. Imagine waking up with your heart racing. Your conscious mind notices the sensation. Perhaps you immediately think, something is wrong. That thought may increase your attention. You notice your breathing. You notice your heartbeat even more. The sensations become more noticeable. And now the brain has additional information suggesting that something unusual is happening. The feeling grows. The explanation reinforces the feeling. A loop begins. This is one reason bodily sensations and thoughts can influence each other. The brain isn't just receiving information. It's continuously updating its interpretation. And this process can be especially powerful when uncertainty is involved. Humans don't like unexplained sensations. If the body feels strange, the mind wants a reason. A headache becomes dehydration. A racing heart becomes anxiety. A stomach sensation becomes worry. Sometimes the explanation is accurate. Sometimes it isn't. But the brain would rather have a model than an unanswered question. In that sense, emotions are part of the brain's attempt to understand the organism it is trying to protect. Your brain isn't simply watching your body from a distance. It is deeply connected to it. The boundary between mind and body is much less clear than everyday language suggests. We say, my body is doing this. My mind is feeling that. But the two systems are constantly communicating. Your thoughts can change your heartbeat. Your heartbeat can influence your feelings. Your expectations can change how you experience physical sensations. Your physical state can influence how you interpret a situation. It's a continuous loop. And perhaps this explains something we've all experienced. There are days when everything seems slightly easier. The same responsibilities are still there. The same problems exist. But your body feels different. You slept well. You have energy. You're calm. Suddenly, ordinary difficulties seem manageable. Then there are other days. You're exhausted. Your body feels heavy. Your attention is scattered. Something small happens and it feels enormous. The world hasn't necessarily changed. Your internal state has. And your brain uses that state to interpret the world. Take a quiet moment here. Notice how you feel right now. You don't have to name the emotion. Just notice the body, the rhythm of your breathing, the position of your shoulders, the feeling in your chest, the weight of your body. Perhaps there is tension. Perhaps there is calm. Whatever is there, simply notice it. Your brain is already noticing too. It is constantly receiving signals from inside you, and it is using those signals to help construct your experience of being alive. This may be one reason emotions can sometimes surprise us. The conscious mind often receives the conclusion before it sees the evidence. You suddenly feel uncomfortable. Then you ask why. You suddenly feel drawn toward something. Then you create an explanation. You suddenly become irritated. Then you remember the reason. The feeling can arrive before the story. And the story may be the brain's attempt to explain what it has already sensed. But there is another fascinating extension of this process. Your brain doesn't only interpret your own body. It also interprets the bodies and behaviors of other people. A person's posture, their expression, the speed of their movements, the tone of their voice, a pause before they answer. You can gather all of this information almost effortlessly. And from it, your brain begins making predictions about what another person might be thinking or feeling. You might notice that someone is quiet and assume they're upset. You might see a smile and assume they're happy. You might hear a particular tone and immediately sense irritation. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes you're completely wrong. But either way, your brain is making a guess. It is trying to read a mind that it cannot directly access. And that is where our next mystery begins. Because the brain that quietly interprets your own emotions is also constantly trying to understand everyone around you. It watches faces, listens to voices, notices gestures, searches for patterns, and then, without asking permission, it constructs a story about what another person might be thinking. Sometimes that story helps you connect. Sometimes it protects you. And sometimes it is nothing more than a very convincing guess. 10. The mind reader. Imagine you're sitting across from someone you know. Perhaps you're having an ordinary conversation. Nothing dramatic is happening. Then halfway through the conversation, they become quiet. Their expression changes slightly. They look away. Maybe their answer is shorter than usual. And almost immediately, a thought appears in your mind. Something's wrong. You don't necessarily stop and analyze every detail. You don't consciously calculate the angle of their head, the exact tone of their voice, or the number of seconds that passed before they answered. You simply sense something. Maybe they're upset. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they're distracted. Maybe they're thinking about something completely unrelated to you. You don't actually know. And yet your brain has already started building an explanation. This is one of the most remarkable things humans do without realizing it. We constantly try to figure out what is happening inside other people's minds. We can't see another person's thoughts directly. There is no window into someone else's consciousness. You can't look at another person's brain and instantly know what they are thinking. And yet, somehow, You can often make surprisingly good guesses. A raised eyebrow can tell you something. A pause can tell you something. A smile, a sigh, a change in someone's voice. The way they stand, the way they look at you, the way they suddenly stop looking at you. Your brain gathers these tiny clues and begins constructing a model. This ability is sometimes described through the idea of theory of mind. It is the capacity to understand that other people have thoughts, beliefs, intentions, desires, and feelings that may be different from your own. A young child gradually learns that another person can know something they don't know. That someone can believe something that isn't true. That another person's perspective can be different from theirs. For adults, this ability becomes so automatic that we rarely notice it. You see someone reaching toward a door, and you assume they intend to open it. You see someone looking at a clock, and you might assume they're wondering what time it is. You see someone smiling while talking to another person, and you infer that the conversation is going well. These are tiny acts of mind reading, not supernatural mind reading. Prediction. Your brain is constantly asking, what is this person probably thinking? What do they want? What are they about to do? What does this expression mean? And it does this rapidly, because social life would be incredibly difficult without it. Imagine having absolutely no ability to infer other people's intentions. Someone reaches toward you. You wouldn't know whether they wanted to shake your hand, give you something, or push you away. Someone becomes silent. You wouldn't know whether they were tired, angry, sad, or simply thinking. Someone laughs. You wouldn't know whether they were amused, nervous, embarrassed, or being sarcastic. Human interaction would become a world of meaningless movements. So the brain makes predictions. And most of the time, those predictions are useful enough. But there's a problem. The brain doesn't have direct access to another person's mind. It has to infer. And inference can be wrong. Imagine sending a message to someone you care about. You see that they have read it. Minutes pass. No response. Your brain immediately begins constructing possibilities. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they didn't know what to say. Maybe they're upset. Maybe something happened. Notice what happened there. Nothing new necessarily entered the environment. There was simply an absence of information. And the brain began filling the gap. Humans don't like uncertainty. When information is incomplete, the brain tends to construct explanations. Sometimes those explanations are helpful. Sometimes they're harmless. And sometimes they create entire emotional worlds from almost nothing. You may spend an hour worrying about a person's silence. Then they finally respond. Sorry, I was in the shower. The story your brain constructed was not reality. It was a prediction. But while you were inside it, it felt real. This is one of the hidden consequences of the mind-reading system. We don't only interpret behavior. We interpret the meaning behind behavior. And meaning is where things become complicated. A person can cross their arms because they're cold. You might interpret it as defensiveness. Someone might avoid eye contact because they're shy. You might interpret it as dishonesty. Someone might speak less because they're tired. You might interpret it as anger. The same behavior can have many explanations. Your brain has to choose one. And it chooses using context. It uses previous experience. It uses your expectations. It uses what you already believe about the person. This is where prediction and perception meet. If you already expect someone to dislike you, a neutral expression may seem unfriendly. If you trust someone deeply, the same expression may seem harmless. The external signal can be identical. The interpretation changes. In this sense, social perception is not simply about observing people. It is about constructing models of them. You carry mental representations of the people in your life. You know who tends to arrive late, who speaks quietly, who jokes when they're nervous, who needs time alone, who becomes animated when they're excited. Over time, your brain learns these patterns. And once it learns them, it can predict what someone is likely to do next. You don't have to consciously list all the evidence. Your brain has already compressed it into familiarity. This is why you can sometimes sense that a close friend is upset before they tell you. You notice something subtle. Perhaps their voice is slightly different. Their movements are slower. Their smile doesn't reach their eyes. You may not be able to explain exactly what you noticed, but your brain can combine many small signals into a feeling. Something is different. This can be remarkably accurate. But again, accuracy is never guaranteed. The same machinery that allows empathy can also produce assumptions. And assumptions can become stories. Stories can become beliefs. Beliefs can influence how you treat people. Then their response may change. And suddenly, your prediction has helped create the very situation you expected. Imagine believing someone is angry with you. You become distant. They notice your distance. They become confused. Now they seem distant too. You interpret their distance as proof that they were angry. The cycle continues. The original assumption may have been wrong, but it changed your behavior, and your behavior changed theirs. The brain is not simply observing social reality. It is participating in it. That is a strange thought. We move through a world filled with other conscious beings, but we never experience their consciousness directly. We experience our brain's best interpretation of their behavior, and they are doing the same thing with us. You are interpreting them. They are interpreting you. Both brains are making predictions. Both are filling in gaps. Both are sometimes wrong. And somehow, despite all this uncertainty, human beings manage to communicate. We fall in love. We build friendships. We cooperate. We forgive. We misunderstand. We repair. We begin again, all while carrying imperfect models of one another. Take a moment to think about someone close to you. How much of what you know about them comes from what they've actually said? How much comes from what you've observed? How much comes from patterns you've noticed over time? And how much comes from assumptions your brain has quietly filled in? You may know someone for 20 years and still be surprised by them. Perhaps that is because no mental model can completely capture another person's inner world. A person is always more complicated than your prediction of them. And perhaps the same is true of yourself. You have a model of who you are. You have expectations about how you'll react. You know what you like, what you dislike, what you're good at, what you're afraid of. You have a story about the kind of person you are. But where did that story come from? Memories, experiences, other people's reactions, your own interpretations, repeated patterns. Your brain has been watching you too. It has been gathering information about your behavior and building a model of you. And that brings us to one of the deepest mysteries of all. Because if the brain can construct models of everyone around you. Perhaps it is also constructing the person you call yourself, the voice in your head, the memories you carry, the traits you identify with, the story you tell about where you've been and where you're going. Maybe the brain doesn't simply contain a self. Maybe it is constantly building one. And if that's true, then the next question becomes almost impossible to avoid. Who exactly is the person you're calling me? 11. The story called me. Imagine someone asks you a very simple question. Who are you? You probably don't need much time to answer. You might think of your name, your age, where you grew up, the people you love, the things you enjoy, the things you dislike, your memories, your ambitions, your mistakes, your personality. Perhaps you would describe yourself as quiet or energetic, optimistic or cautious, curious or practical. You might mention your work, your family, your friendships, or the things you hope to accomplish. All of these pieces seem to belong to one person. You. There is an intuitive feeling that beneath all the changing circumstances of life, there is something continuous. Something that has been there all along. The child you once was somehow became the teenager you remember. That teenager somehow became the adult listening to these words. Your body changed. Your opinions changed. Your surroundings changed. Your relationships changed. Even many of your memories changed. And yet, somewhere beneath all of it, there seems to be a continuous thread. A sense of, I am still me. But what exactly is that feeling? Where does it come from? And perhaps most strangely, who is creating it? Your brain receives an enormous amount of information about your life. It knows where your body is. It knows what you are doing. It remembers things that happened yesterday. It remembers things that happened years ago. It recognizes familiar people. It knows what you usually enjoy. It knows what makes you uncomfortable. It knows what you're trying to accomplish. It notices how other people respond to you. And from all of these fragments, it can construct something that feels remarkably unified. A person, a character, a story. You. Think about a novel. A novel may contain hundreds of events, different locations, different emotions, different versions of the same character. But when you read it, you don't experience hundreds of disconnected events. You experience a story. The events become connected. One chapter explains another. A decision in the past influences something in the future. A character changes, but you still recognize them as the same character. Your sense of self may work in a somewhat similar way. Your life is made of countless disconnected moments. You woke up this morning. You had a conversation. You remembered something. You became annoyed. You laughed. You made a decision. You forgot something. You imagined tomorrow. Most of these moments disappear. And yet your brain connects enough of them together to create continuity. It gives you the feeling that all these experiences belong to one ongoing person. This doesn't mean the self is fake. That's too simple. The experience of being a self is very real. You have a body. You have memories. You have preferences. You have relationships. You have a history. But the question is whether the feeling of a continuous self is something your brain continuously constructs. Imagine waking up tomorrow with no memory of your life. Your body would still be there. Your heart would still beat. You would still have a brain. You would still perceive light and sound. But something essential would be missing. You might not know your name. You might not recognize your family. You might not understand why certain places feel familiar. The story connecting the present to the past would be broken. And that tells us something about identity. Memory plays an enormous role in making you feel like the same person over time. But we've already seen that memory is not a perfect recording. It changes. It is reconstructed. It can become softer, sharper, more emotional, less detailed, or differently interpreted. And yet those changing memories still contribute to your sense of who you are. This creates a beautiful paradox. The thing that helps connect your past self to your present self is itself constantly changing. Your identity may therefore be less like a statue and more like a river. A river looks continuous. You can point to it and say, "There is the river." But the water is always moving. The individual molecules you see today will not necessarily be the same ones you saw yesterday. And yet we still give the river a name. We still recognize it as the same river. Perhaps identity works in a similar way. You change continuously, and yet your brain creates enough continuity for you to experience yourself as one person. This becomes even more interesting when you consider how much of your identity comes from other people. Think about how you describe yourself. Perhaps you believe you're funny because people have laughed at your jokes. Perhaps you believe you're shy because you've always been told you're quiet. Perhaps you think you're responsible because people have depended on you. Perhaps you think you're difficult because someone important once described you that way. Other people's reactions can become part of your internal model. Over time, the outside world can become part of the story you tell about yourself. And once a belief becomes part of that story, you may begin behaving in ways that confirm it. If you believe you're terrible at something, you may avoid practicing it. Avoidance prevents improvement. The lack of improvement seems to confirm the belief. The belief becomes stronger. The story reinforces itself. But the opposite can happen too. You begin to see yourself as someone capable of learning. You try. You fail. You adjust. You try again. Eventually, your brain updates its model. I am someone who can do this. The story changes, and your behavior changes with it. This is one reason identity can be powerful. The story your brain tells about you can influence what you expect from yourself. And expectations influence behavior. So the self isn't simply a description. It can become a prediction. Your brain uses its model of you to anticipate what you will probably do next. If you've always avoided public speaking, your brain expects anxiety. If you've always loved a certain kind of music, your brain predicts enjoyment when it hears it. If you've been hurt before, your brain may expect similar situations to hurt again. The self becomes part of the predictive system. Your brain isn't just asking, "What is happening?" It is also asking, "What would someone like me probably do?" And sometimes that question quietly guides your choices. Take a moment to reflect on that. Think about a belief you have about yourself. Maybe it's something simple. I don't like crowds. I've never been good at languages. I'm a night person. I'm not creative. I'm always late. Perhaps it's completely accurate. Perhaps it is partly accurate. But where did it come from? Was it always true? Or did it become true because you repeated the story often enough? This doesn't mean we can simply think ourselves into becoming anyone we want. The brain is constrained by biology, experience, circumstances, and countless factors outside conscious control. But it does mean that our internal descriptions of ourselves are not necessarily permanent. They can be updated, just like memories, just like predictions, just like habits. And perhaps that is one of the quiet mysteries of being human. We spend our lives trying to understand ourselves, but the thing doing the understanding is the same brain that is constructing the person being understood. The observer and the observed are intertwined. You look inward and find thoughts. You notice emotions. You remember experiences. You examine your personality. But all of those things are being interpreted by the same system that produced them. It's almost like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. You can experience them. You can study their effects. But you can't step completely outside yourself and observe the entire system from an independent position. And yet, something remarkable can happen. You can notice your own thoughts. You can realize, I am thinking. You can notice anger and say, I am feeling angry. You can notice fear and say, I am afraid. There seems to be a small space between the experience and the awareness of the experience. And that space brings us dangerously close to the deepest mystery of the entire video. Because if your brain is generating thoughts and constructing memories and interpreting emotions and predicting behavior and building a model of who you are, then what exactly is consciousness? Who is the one noticing all of this? Perhaps the conscious self is the author, or perhaps it is the narrator. Perhaps it is the observer. Perhaps it is simply another process within the brain, watching other processes unfold. We don't have a final answer, and maybe that uncertainty is part of what makes consciousness so fascinating. You can study the brain. You can measure electrical activity. You can observe patterns. You can map regions involved in memory, emotion, perception, and decision-making. But none of those observations completely explain what it feels like to be you. There is still the private experience. The strange fact that there is something it is like to be here. Something it is like to hear these words. Something it is like to remember your childhood. Something it is like to look at your own hand and know that it belongs to you. And perhaps that is where the story becomes quiet. Because throughout this entire journey, we've been looking at things your brain does without asking you. It filters, predicts, remembers, protects, automates, regulates, interprets, and constructs. But now we are standing at the edge of the final question. If so much of your experience is being prepared before it reaches conscious awareness, what role does consciousness actually play? Are you the one making the decisions? Or are you sometimes becoming aware of decisions that have already begun? Is consciousness the driver, the passenger, the narrator, or something else entirely? Take a moment to let that question remain unanswered. You don't have to solve it. Just notice that you're thinking about it. Notice the thought appearing. Notice it changing. Notice another thought replacing it. And notice something even stranger. You didn't consciously decide what your next thought would be. It simply arrived. And now, as we move into the final segment, we're going to follow that thought to its most unsettling destination. The question of choice. The moment when you believe, I decided to do this. Because somewhere beneath that simple sentence is one of the oldest mysteries we have. If the brain begins preparing for an action before you consciously become aware of choosing it. Then perhaps the most important decision in your life is not what you choose. Perhaps it is understanding. What exactly is doing the choosing? 12. The choice you never saw coming. Imagine you're sitting quietly in a room. There is nothing urgent happening. No decision needs to be made. For a few moments, you simply listen to the silence. Then, without planning it, you decide to move your hand. You think, I'll raise my hand. And then you do. It seems almost absurdly simple. You wanted to move your hand. You decided to move it. Your brain sent the necessary signals. Your hand moved. What could be more obvious? But now imagine that we could somehow slow that moment down. Not physically, but neurologically. Imagine watching the activity inside your brain just before the movement. Something begins to happen. Neural activity changes. The brain starts preparing for the movement. And only afterward do you become consciously aware of the intention. This possibility has fascinated neuroscientists and philosophers for decades. Some experiments have suggested that measurable brain activity associated with a voluntary action can begin before people report becoming consciously aware of their decision to act. The details of these experiments are complicated. They do not prove that free will is an illusion. Scientists continue to debate what exactly these early signals mean. But they raise a deeply uncomfortable question. What if consciousness isn't always the starting point of a decision? What if the brain begins moving toward an action, and consciousness only becomes aware of that movement a little later? Think about how strange that would be. You might experience yourself as the author of a decision. But perhaps the story has already begun before you consciously realize you're writing it. It's almost like watching a movie and suddenly hearing the narrator explain something that the characters have already done. The explanation arrives after the action has started. And yet, from inside the experience, it still feels like you chose. This question has created an enormous philosophical debate. If your brain is responsible for your thoughts, emotions, impulses, memories, and decisions, then where exactly does conscious choice begin? And if every thought has causes? If every emotion has causes? If every decision emerges from a combination of biology, memory, environment, experience, and current circumstances, then could you have genuinely chosen anything differently? Perhaps that sounds frightening, but let's slow down, because there is an important distinction between saying that decisions have causes and saying that decisions don't matter. Imagine a tree. Its branches grow according to sunlight, water, temperature, genetics, and countless environmental conditions. You wouldn't say the tree isn't really growing because its growth has causes. You would simply say that the growth is the result of a complex system. Human decisions may be similar. Your brain doesn't make choices in a vacuum. It considers memories, predictions, emotions, goals, values, consequences, social expectations, physical needs, and countless other signals. All of these influences shape what you decide. But perhaps that doesn't make the decision meaningless. Perhaps those influences are part of what you are. When you choose to call someone you love, the decision doesn't become less personal because your brain generated it. Your memories of that person are part of you. Your emotions are part of you. Your values are part of you. Your desire to connect is part of you. The neural activity that produces the decision is not some foreign machine operating inside you. It is your brain. It is you. And perhaps this is where the free will question becomes more subtle. Maybe the real mystery isn't whether your brain causes your decisions. It clearly does. Maybe the deeper question is what we mean by you. If the self is the ongoing system created by your brain, body, memories, values, experiences, and relationships, then a decision produced by that system is still a decision produced by you. The machinery doesn't necessarily cancel the person. It may be what makes the person possible. Take a moment to reflect on something you chose recently. Maybe you decided to watch a particular video. Maybe you called someone. Maybe you made a meal. Maybe you chose to go for a walk instead of staying inside. At first glance, each decision seems like a single event. But look beneath it. Why did you choose it? Because of something you remembered. Something you wanted. Something you feared. Something you expected. Something you had learned. Something your body needed. Something you valued. Your choice emerged from a vast history. You are never choosing from nowhere. You are choosing from everything that made you who you are up to that moment. And that means every decision contains traces of your past, your childhood, your habits, your relationships, your successes, your failures, your fears, your hopes, your experiences. All of them quietly gather inside the moment of choice. You may experience a decision as a single instant, but beneath that instant is an enormous amount of history. Perhaps that is why the brain can sometimes surprise you. You think you know what you will do. Then you respond differently. You thought you would be angry. Instead, you laughed. You thought you would give up. Instead, you continued. You expected to feel afraid. Instead, you felt curious. The brain is constantly updating its predictions. And because it is constantly changing, you are never exactly the same decision maker twice. Yesterday's version of you has been modified by what happened yesterday. Today's version carries that information forward. Tomorrow's version will carry something else. The self is continuously becoming. And perhaps this gives us a more peaceful way to think about the things your brain does without asking you. Your brain is not an enemy secretly controlling your life. It is the biological system through which your life is being experienced. It protects you before you understand why. It remembers things you don't consciously summon. It creates habits that make ordinary actions easier. It keeps time while you sleep. It constructs the visual world. It interprets your emotions. It guesses what other people are thinking. It builds a story called me. And sometimes it begins preparing a decision before you consciously notice the choice. All of this can sound unsettling, but it can also be strangely beautiful. Because you don't have to consciously control everything for life to happen. Your heart beats without permission. Your lungs breathe without instructions. Your body repairs itself. Your brain regulates countless processes while you simply sit here listening. There is an enormous amount of life happening beneath awareness. And perhaps consciousness is not valuable because it controls every detail. Perhaps its value lies partly in its ability to notice, to reflect, to pause, to reconsider, to learn. You may not control which thought appears next, but you can sometimes decide what to do with the thought. You may not control the first emotion that rises, but you can sometimes choose how you respond to it. You may not control the automatic impulse, but awareness can create a small space between impulse and action. And inside that space, something remarkable becomes possible. Not perfect control, not absolute freedom, but influence, reflection, change. Perhaps free will was never meant to mean that your mind operates independently of everything that came before it. Perhaps freedom is something quieter, the ability of a complex system to learn from itself, to notice its own patterns, to change its predictions, to develop new habits, to reconsider old memories, to become slightly different because it has understood something. You are shaped by your past, but your past is not the only thing shaping you. The present is still happening, and the brain is still learning. So as this journey comes to an end, think back to the title. 12 things your brain does without asking you. It predicts, it remembers, it protects, it automates, it keeps time, it constructs what you see, it interprets what you feel, it reads the people around you, it builds a story of who you are, and it prepares actions before you fully understand them. At first, these processes might seem like evidence that you are not in control. But perhaps there is another way to see them. Perhaps they are evidence of just how much is happening inside you at every moment. You are not a simple creature assigning commands to a passive machine. You are an astonishingly complex living system. Part memory, part prediction, part habit, part emotion, part body, part story. And somehow, from all of these moving pieces, there emerges this strange experience of being here. Right now, listening, thinking, wondering, existing. Take one final moment to notice your breathing. You didn't have to command the last breath, and you won't have to command the next one. Your body already knows what to do. Notice the sounds around you. You didn't consciously create them. Your brain is simply interpreting them. Notice whatever thought is passing through your mind. You didn't necessarily choose that thought either. It arrived, and now perhaps another one will arrive. Then another. You don't have to chase them. You don't have to solve anything. Just let them pass. Because maybe the deepest lesson isn't that your brain does things without asking you. Maybe it is that you don't need to control every hidden process in order to be alive. Somewhere beneath conscious thought, the machinery continues. Quietly, automatically, anciently. Your heart beats. Your lungs breathe. Your brain predicts. Your body adjusts. Your memories shift. Your attention wanders. And through all of it, you remain here. Whatever you ultimately means. Perhaps we will never completely solve that mystery. And maybe we don't have to. For now, it may be enough to notice the strange miracle of it. That inside this ordinary human body, there is an entire hidden world working without permission. And somehow, for a little while, you get to experience it. So let the questions remain unanswered. Let the thoughts become quieter. Let the day loosen its grip. And if you're listening late at night, perhaps you can simply rest with one final thought. You don't have to understand everything your brain is doing. You don't have to control every thought. You don't have to solve the mystery of consciousness tonight. Your brain can keep working quietly in the background. It has been doing so your entire life. And for now, you can simply close your eyes. Breathe and let it continue.